The courtroom was heavy with silence, like a storm waiting to break. People filled the benches, whispering to one another, their eyes turning to the tall doors every time they opened. The air was thick with judgment, with expectation, with curiosity. Then, the door creaked open and a woman stepped inside. She was not dressed like the lawyers in black coats, nor like the people in formal clothes. She wore scrubs, plain blue hospital scrubs, with a small name tag still pinned to her chest. Her shoes were worn, her hair tied back in a simple bun. Her eyes looked tired, but there was fire hidden somewhere. Deep inside them, people gasped. Some pointed, some shook their heads. A nurse, a black woman, walking into a courtroom, dressed as if she had just left the hospital. To them, it was strange, unusual, even disrespectful. Whispers grew louder, echoing. Off the wooden walls, the judge, an old man with silver hair and cold eyes, shifted in his seat. He tapped his gavel lightly, the sound sharp and commanding. "Order," he said, though his eyes never left the woman in scrubs. His lips pressed into a thin line. Amara, the nurse, walked slowly toward her seat. Each step felt heavy, like she was carrying the weight of 1,000 stairs. She did not bow her head, though her chest rose and fell with deep breaths. She could hear the whispers behind her, mocking, questioning, doubting, but she kept walking. The judge finally spoke, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "This is a court of law," he said, "and in this court, respect must be shown." His words cut like ice. His gaze moved up and down her clothes. "Is this how you choose to appear before me? In scrubs? Do you not own proper clothes?" The room grew even quieter. The whispers stopped. All eyes were now on Amara. Some looked at her with pity, others with scorn. The judge leaned back in his chair, waiting for her to answer. His fingers tapped on the desk, impatient, but Amara said nothing. Her lips stayed closed, her hands folded together. She lowered her eyes, not out of weakness, but to hold her strength. Silence was her shield. For a moment, it seemed like the judge had won, like his words had crushed her inside. However, Amara's mind was racing. She thought of the long night she had just survived, the hospital halls that smelled of disinfectant and fear. The faces of patients, old, young, rich, poor, all of them holding onto her hands, trusting her with their lives. She thought of the moment she left the hospital. Her shift not yet done, but her summons to court demanding she come. She had no time to change, no time to rest, only time to rush. Her heart beat faster. She knew she was being judged for her clothes, not her work, for her skin, not her soul. Her silence was not weakness, it was patience. She knew her moment to speak had not yet come. The people on the benches shifted. Uncomfortable with the tension, some felt embarrassed for her. Others wanted to see her punished. A few looked at her with admiration, though they dared not speak. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until it felt like the air itself might break. The judge leaned forward, his voice harsher now. "You stand before this court, accused, and yet you show up as if this is a casual place." His words dripped with disdain. "Do you not value this court? Do you not value justice?" Amara's chest tightened. She felt every eye on her, pressing down like stones. She lifted her gaze for the briefest second, her eyes meeting the judge's. It was not defiance, not yet. But there was something, there's something unbroken. The silence returned again. It was a silence that held power. A silence that said more than words could. The courtroom felt it, even if they did not understand it. The whispers began again, softer this time, uncertain. In that silence, the story began not with words, not with anger, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who had lived through nights darker than this, who had seen death and still chosen life, who had come to court not to bow but to stand. The judge did not know it yet, The people in the benches did not know it yet, but this silence was only the beginning, and soon it would break in a way none of them could forget. The gavel tapped again, echoing like thunder through the hall. "Answer me," the judge commanded. His voice tried to cover the crack of unease growing beneath it, but Amara still said nothing. Her silence was her shield. And her shield was unbroken. The crowd leaned forward, hearts caught in the stillness. What would she say? Would she beg for forgiveness? Would she explain herself? Or would she shatter the silence with something they would never forget? The courtroom waited, breathless. The silence grew heavier. And Amara sat still, her scrubs plain, her spirit unbowed. This was the silence before the storm, the silence that would change everything. The silence in the courtroom was sharp. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the ticking clock on the wall. The judge's eyes never left Amara. His gaze was heavy, full of cold power. The air itself felt tight, as if everyone was waiting for lightning to strike. Finally, the judge leaned forward. His gavel tapped once more, sharp and commanding. "Miss Amara," he said, his voice deep and heavy, "this is a court of law, not a hospital ward." His tone carried judgment in every word. "You dare stand before me wearing scrubs? Do you have no respect for this court? For justice?" Gasps filled the benches. Some people covered their mouths, shocked at the harshness. Others nodded, agreeing with him. Whispered voices hissed through the crowd. Unprofessional, shameful, disrespect. The words floated in the air, cutting like knives. Amara sat still. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Her back straight, she did not answer right away. She let the judge's words echo in the silence. Her breathing was slow, measured, but her eyes, though lowered, held a glimmer of strength. The judge's voice grew harsher. "Do you think yourself above this court? Do you believe saving lives gives you the right to ignore the rules of respect? Do you not own proper clothes, woman?" His words were sharp, each one meant to wound. Amara lifted her head slowly. Her tired eyes met the judge's for a moment. The room held its breath, but she did not speak. Instead, she allowed her silence to stretch, to hold weight. Her silence made some uncomfortable. Some looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The judge leaned back in his chair, his lips curling in frustration. "You stand accused here today," he continued. "Yet you come dressed in scrubs like a common worker who has no sense of place. This court is not your hospital, Miss Amara. You cannot treat it like a hallway you walk through after your shift." His gavel tapped again, louder this time. Echoing off the wooden walls, a man in the back row muttered, "She should be ashamed." Another whispered, "Doesn't she know how serious this is?" But there were others, quiet voices, who looked at her differently. Some saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the strength in her silence. Some began to wonder what story those scrubs carried. Amara's mind wandered as the judge continued. She thought of the hours before this trial, the endless night in the hospital. She remembered rushing from one bed to another, holding the hands of those too weak to hold their own. She remembered the child with fever who clung to her finger until sleep finally came. She remembered the old man who whispered, "Thank you, Angel." With his last breath, she came straight from that world into this one. A world colder and harsher. She had no time to change, no time to rest. Her clothes were not disrespect. They were proof of the life she had lived that night. A life of service, of sacrifice. But the judge did not see that. He only saw fabric, not meaning. The judge's words cut through her thoughts. "This court is not a place for carelessness," he declared. "Your appearance insults the very foundation of justice. How can I take your testimony seriously when you cannot even dress with respect?" Amara's jaw tightened, her fingers pressed together. She felt the weight of his words pressing down, pressing hard, but deep inside, a fire began to rise. She knew she was not weak. She knew she had earned her place here not by clothes, but by courage. The people leaned forward, curious. Some wanted her to break, to apologize, to beg. Others hoped for something else, something stronger. The air trembled with expectation. The judge's face grew red with anger. His voice thundered. "Answer me, woman. Why do you disgrace this courtroom with your scrubs? Speak." His gavel slammed, the sound like thunder. At that moment, Amara lifted her head fully. Her tired eyes turned sharp. Her silence, and Amara waited, her silence unbroken, her spirit unbowed. This was not weakness. This was the gathering of strength. The storm had not yet come, but when it did, no one would forget it. Amara sat in the courtroom, the judge's words still hanging. In the air like smoke that refused to fade, the crowd whispered. The sound like restless waves against the walls, but inside her mind, another world was alive, a world of long nights, rushing footsteps, and cries for help. Her struggle was not the courtroom. It was the life she lived every single day. Her scrubs were not an accident, not laziness, not disrespect. They were her shield, her badge, her second skin. She wore them because she had not left the hospital until the sun was already rising. She thought back to the night before. The sound of machines beeping filled her memory. The soft cries of patients echoed in her ears. She remembered the small boy with a broken arm, his tears soaking her shoulder as she whispered, "It's going to be okay." She remembered the old woman gasping for breath, clutching her hand, afraid to let go, for 12 hours. Amara had been more than a nurse. She had been a mother to the orphaned, a daughter to the lonely, a fighter for those too weak to fight for themselves. She had given all her strength, every heartbeat, every drop of energy, to the people lying in those hospital beds, and when her shift finally ended, when the doctor said, "You can go," she had no time to rest. Her court summons was waiting. The case that dragged her here could not be ignored. She did not run home to change. She did not stop to eat. She came here as she was a nurse who had just carried lives in her hands. But the courtroom did not see that struggle. They only saw fabric, blue scrubs instead of a dress, worn shoes instead of polished heels. To them, she was careless, disrespectful. Les Amara closed her eyes for a moment. The tiredness pressed against her bones. Her eyelids heavy, her back ached from standing all night. Her fingers still trembled faintly from endless work. Her stomach was empty, but her spirit fought too. "Stay strong in the benches," a young woman whispered to her friend. "Why didn't she change? Doesn't she know the rules?" The friend shrugged. "Maybe she doesn't care." Others muttered words like shameful and lazy. Each word dug like a thorn, but Amara's silence held. Her heart carried louder truths than their whispers. The judge spoke again, his voice echoing in her ears. But her thoughts drifted back to the faces she had left behind. She saw the child gripping her finger, the tears of a man whose wife she saved, the shaky smile of an old woman who whispered blessings into her hand. These were the reasons she wore scrubs. These were the battles she fought in silence. She remembered washing blood off her hands at dawn, her reflection in the hospital mirror, dark circles under her eyes, hair undone, shoulders heavy. She had whispered to herself, "Just one more hour. Amara, you can make it. Just one more hour." But one more hour turned into another, and another, until she was standing in a courtroom. Judged not for her failures, but for her sacrifices. Her struggle was invisible to those who sat on wooden benches, polished shoes tapping the floor. Her struggle did not shine like gold or jewels. It smelled of antiseptic. It tasted of exhaustion. It lived in scrubs that bore the wrinkles of a war fought in silence. Her silence now was not weakness, it was the echo of every patient she had carried. It was the strength of the sick who held her hand. It was the unspoken voice of the lives she had touched. The crowd stared, waiting. Some were restless, hungry for drama. Others leaned forward, Sensing something deeper, they could not name it, but they felt it. A woman judged for her clothes. Yet carrying something far heavier than cloth, Amara lifted her chin slightly, her eyes scanned the courtroom. She saw the faces of strangers, none of whom knew her story. None of whom knew the price of her silence. She wanted to tell them, wanted to show them what it meant to wear scrubs, but the time was not yet right. The judge's gavel tapped again, sharp and impatient. Miss Amara, this court will not wait forever for your reply, he said. His voice was iron, but his eyes held something else. Now, flicker of unease. He expected her to break, to beg. But Amara's silence was stronger than his thunder. Her struggle was not his judgment. Her struggle was the life she carried, unseen and unvalued. The pain in her bones, the hunger in her stomach, the exhaustion in her eyes, all of it spoke louder than any words she could give. The benches shifted again. A man whispered, "She looks so tired." A woman murmured, "Maybe she just came from work." Slowly, small seeds of doubt began to grow. The harsh words of the judge did not match the quiet dignity before them. Amara breathed deeply. Her silence was not forever. Her reply would come, and when it did, it would not only answer the judge. It would speak for every nurse who had been unseen, for every worker who had been judged by clothes and not by heart. For now, she held her silence. The struggle burned inside her, unseen but unbroken. Her eyes glimmered with something the judge could not erase: truth. The courtroom waited. The judge pressed harder. The crowd leaned closer, and Amara sat still, carrying her struggle like armor. This was the calm before her voice, the calm before the storm. The judge's voice thundered again, his words sharp and heavy. "This court will not tolerate silence," he said. His gavel slammed against the desk, the sound echoing through the room like thunder rolling across the sky. The courtroom shook with tension. Amara sat still, her scrubs wrinkled, her eyes tired but steady. She had listened. She had endured. She had allowed the storm of his words to pass over her. But now, the storm inside her was rising. For too long she had carried her struggle in silence. For too long she had allowed others to define her worth. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. Some expected her to beg for forgiveness. Some thought she would crumble under the judge's weight. But Amara's chest lifted with a slow breath, and when she exhaled, her silence cracked like glass. The judge noticed, his eyes narrowed. "Finally," he muttered. "Finally, you will answer." He leaned forward, eager to hear what excuse she would give, eager to crush her reply with more scorn. But Amara did not rush. She let the silence stretch one moment longer, her fingers unfolded, her hands resting flat on the wooden table. Her eyes lifted, meeting the judge's directly. There was no fear there now, no weakness. Her tiredness had transformed into something sharper, something stronger. The people on the benches felt it, a shift in the air, a stillness that carried. Wait, something was about to happen, something that would break the balance of the room. The judge tapped his gavel again, though his voice cracked with impatience. "Speak, woman. Why do you dishonor this court with your appearance? Why do you mock justice with your silence?" Amara finally spoke. Her voice was soft, quiet, but it carried through the silence. "Your Honor," she said. Her first words drew every ear, every eye. The courtroom stilled. "You see scrubs and think disrespect," she continued slowly. "But these scrubs are not disrespect. These scrubs are my life. These scrubs are the lives I held in my hands last night." The crowd gasped. The whispers turned into sharp breaths. The judge's eyebrows rose, surprised by her tone, not weak, not begging, but steady. Her voice grew stronger, while others slept in warm beds. "I was awake, running from room to room, holding hands of strangers who prayed not to die. I came here straight from that place, not because I don't respect this court, but because I respect life more. The benches trembled with murmurs. Some nodded slowly, some lowered their eyes, ashamed. The judge gripped his gavel tightly, but his hand shook slightly. Amara's eyes burned now, not with anger, but with a fire of truth. "You scold me for wearing scrubs," she said. "But do you know what these scrubs mean? They mean I fought for lives when others gave up. They mean I washed blood from my hands while whispering comfort to the dying. They mean I gave every piece of myself until there was nothing left, and still I came here when summoned." Her words cut through the air like a blade. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, filled with the beating of hearts. The judge opened his mouth to interrupt, but the sound of shifting benches stopped him. People in the crowd leaned forward, their eyes fixed on Amara. She was no longer the tired nurse in scrubs. They saw her now as a warrior, a woman carrying more weight than any of them could imagine. Her voice shook once, but she steadied it. "You ask me why I wear scrubs, Your Honor? I ask you, would you rather I changed my clothes and let someone die? Would you rather I ignored the cries of a child so I could appear respectful here? Is respect in clothes, or is it in action?" The words rang through the courtroom. The crowd was silent, not because they doubted, but because they were stunned. Even those who had mocked her now lowered their eyes. Some clenched their hands, ashamed. The judge's jaw tightened. His pride battled with the truth in her words. He wanted to scold again, to silence her, but something inside him faltered. Amara leaned forward slightly, her tired eyes unblinking. Respect is not in fabric. Respect is in sacrifice. It is in the lives we touch, the pain we heal, the hope we carry. If my scrubs insult you, Your Honor, then it is not my clothes that shame. The judge froze. His gavel lifted but did not fall. His hand trembled. For the first time, his authority cracked. Amara sat back slowly. Her chest rose and fell. Her words still hung in the air like fire. She had broken the silence. She had broken the weight of his judgment. And though the storm was not yet over, the tide had shifted. The people could feel it. They were no longer waiting for her to break. They were waiting for the judge to answer. Waiting to see if he could stand against truth itself. And the judge, red-faced and shaken, realized he had pushed too far. His authority was no longer untouchable. His harsh words had awoken something greater. Amara had reached her breaking point, but instead of crumbling, she had risen. She had turned her struggle into strength, her silence into fire. The storm had begun, and the courtroom would never be the same again. The courtroom was frozen. Amara's words still echoed in the air like thunder that refused to fade. Every face turned toward her, eyes wide, lips parted. Even the judge, who moments before had seemed untouchable, now sat stiff, his gavel hanging useless in his hand. The silence was no longer against her. It was with her, waiting for what she would say next. The crowd leaned forward, breaths shallow. Amara had broken through, but her reply was not finished. She had more to give. And this time, her voice carried the weight of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every life she had touched. Her hands rested on the table. "Steady now, Your Honor," she said firmly. "I came here today not as a rebel, not as a woman without respect. I came as who I am, a nurse, a servant of life." Her words were simple, but each one struck deep. She looked at the judge with unshaking eyes. "Do you know what it means to wear these scrubs? It means blood on your hands one moment and tears in your arms the next. It means listening to final words whispered in your ear. It means giving away your strength so someone else can live. That is respect. That is sacrifice." The benches stirred. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A man who had mocked her earlier now lowered his head. Ashamed, the atmosphere shifted, heavier, richer. The silence turned into quiet reverence. Amara continued, her voice rising. You say I insult this court by standing here in scrubs. I tell you, these scrubs are the reason families still have fathers, mothers, children. These scrubs carry the cries of those I saved, the prayers of those who could not pray for themselves. If that is insult, then I will carry it proudly. The words struck the walls of the courtroom like a storm. The judge's lips pressed together, but he could not speak. He had thunder, but she had truth, and truth was louder. Her voice shook once. But it was not weakness. It was the weight of memory. Last night, when the world slept, I held the hand of a boy who begged me not to let him die. I told him to be strong, to breathe, to fight. He is alive today, not because of magic, not because of miracles, but because of these hands, these scrubs, this work. Gasps rippled through the benches. People looked at her differently now. Some nodded, tears forming in their eyes. Some even whispered prayers under their breath. The judge tried to raise his gavel, but it fell back against the desk. His hand shook, his face red, his voice caught in his throat. Amara leaned forward, her voice cutting through the silence. You see only cloth, Your Honor, but behind this cloth is a life of sacrifice. You asked if I respect this court. I ask you this. This court respects sacrifice. Does this court respect the ones who save lives while others sleep? The question struck harder than any accusation. The silence after it was heavy. The people shifted in their seats. Some nodded firmly now. Standing in spirit with her, her reply was no longer just to the judge. It was to everyone who had ever looked down on her, everyone who had ever thought less of her because of skin, clothes, or class. Her words rose, strong and unbroken. Respect is not stitched in fabric. Respect is in action, in love, in courage. I will not apologize for these scrubs. I will not apologize for saving lives. If this court cannot see respect in that, then perhaps it is this court that has forgotten justice. The crowd erupted. A wave of clapping began at the back, soft at first, then spreading like fire. Hands smacked together, feet stamped the ground. The courtroom filled with applause. Thunderous, unstoppable. Some stood, others cried. The walls shook with the sound of people rising for her. The nurse they had mocked minutes ago was now the one they honored. The judge tried to call for order, but his gavel strikes were drowned in the storm of clapping. Amara did not smile. She did not bask in victory. Her face remained calm. Her words were not for praise, they were for truth. She sat still, her chest rising and falling, her eyes steady. She had given her reply. The courtroom would never forget it. The applause grew louder, rolling like waves. Some people shouted, "She's right." Others cried openly. A woman whispered, "She's stronger than any of us." The judge sat stiff, his power shaken, his authority, once untouchable, now bent beneath the weight of her truth. He tried to speak, but his words were lost, swallowed by the roar of the people. Amara lowered her gaze again, not in shame, but in peace. Her struggle had turned into strength, her silence into fire, her voice into thunder. She had spoken for herself, for every nurse, for every unseen fighter who carried the world while no one watched. The people would leave this courtroom remembering her words, not his scolding, remembering her courage. Not his anger, remembering her scrubs, not as insult, but as honor. And though the trial was not yet over, though the case still stood, everyone knew something had already changed. The balance of power had shifted. Amara had given her powerful reply, and the world inside that courtroom would never be the same. Again, the sound of clapping rolled through the courtroom like a storm that could not be stopped. It began with a few hesitant hands, then spread like fire across the benches. Soon, every corner of the room echoed with thunderous applause. The Wooden walls shook, the gavel strikes drowned in the roar. Amara sat still at her table. She did not rise, she did not wave. She let the crowd speak for her. The same people who had whispered insults now clapped with respect, some with tears in their eyes, some with shame heavy on their faces. The judge slammed his gavel again, his voice straining. Order, order in the court. But no one listened. His words, once feared, were nothing now against the sound of truth that filled the hall. His face reddened, his hand trembled. He was no longer in control. On the benches, an old man stood, his voice carrying over the clapping. She is right. She is not disrespecting this court, she is honoring life itself. Others echoed, she saved lives. How can that be shame? A woman cried out, I would trust her with my children's lives before I'd trust anyone in this room. Applause grew louder. Amara's words had lit something in their hearts, a spark of courage, a reminder of sacrifice. They saw her now not as a woman in scrubs, but as a warrior dressed in honor. The judge's eyes darted across the room. He had ruled many trials, commanded silence with a single word. But today his power slipped like sand through his fingers. He shouted again, silence, or I will clear this courtroom. But his threat fell empty, drowned by voices that no longer feared him. Amara lifted her chin slightly. Her eyes moved across the crowd. She saw faces glowing with admiration. Some mouthed, thank you. Others nodded at her with quiet respect. The tide had turned, and she had not begged for it, she had earned it. A man in the front row wiped his eyes and whispered, I judged her wrong. Another added, she carries more respect in those scrubs than we do in our suits. The young woman who had mocked her earlier now looked down, unable to meet Amara's eyes. Shame washed over her face. She whispered to her friend, we were wrong. She is stronger than all of us. The clapping slowly turned into chants, at first soft, then louder. Respect, respect, respect. The voices bounced off the walls, shaking the air. The judge pounded his gavel until the wood nearly cracked. His voice rose. This is my courtroom. You will obey the law. But even as he shouted, doubt crept into his face. His authority had been shaken. His words carried less weight than hers. Amara finally spoke again, her voice calm, cutting through the storm. Please, sit, she said. Softly, her tone was not commanding, but respectful, and the crowd listened. Slowly quieting, their applause fading into silence. But their eyes remained locked on her, glowing with pride and respect. The judge exhaled sharply. Clutching his gavel, the silence now did not belong to him, belonged to her. She had taken the room without force, only truth. Amara turned her eyes toward the judge, her face calm, her voice steady. You asked for respect, Your Honor. It has been given not to your gavel, not to your title, but to the truth spoke. The judge leaned back, his eyes unsettled. He had been a ruler of words, a master of silence. But this day had slipped beyond his control. He realized now that the more he tried to fight her, the more he lost, because her power was not in defiance, was in truth. Whispers spread again. Softer now. Reverent, she is brave, she is strong. She carries respect like no one else. The courtroom, once filled with doubt and scorn, had transformed into a place of honor. Not because of the judge, not because of the law, but because one woman dared to speak from the heart. Amara's powerful reply had planted seeds that could not be erased, seeds of respect, of courage, of justice. The people would carry those words with them long after this trial ended. The judge clenched his jaw, his pride wounded. His gavel rested heavy in his hand, but deep inside, even he knew this courtroom no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth, and the truth had come from the nurse in scrubs. The storm of clapping had passed, but its echo still lingered. The crowd sat silently now, waiting not for the judge, but for her. Their eyes followed her every breath, their hearts tied to her strength. And though Amara remained calm, her spirit quiet, the truth was clear, her words had changed everything. The courtroom's reaction had sealed it. The respect she had been denied was now undeniable. The courtroom was still. The echoes of applause had faded. But the memory of it lingered like a heartbeat in every chest. The people sat upright, their eyes fixed on Amara. The judge gripped his gavel tightly, his face pale with anger, but also with something he could not admit, fear. Amara breathed slowly. Her chest rose and fell. Her silence now was not the silence of defense. It was the silence of power. She had spoken her truth, and the people had accepted it. Yet she knew the moment was not complete. She had one final thing to say, the last word that would seal everything. The judge finally broke the stillness. His voice cracked with pride. "This court is not a stage for speeches," he said. "You forget where you are, Miss Amara. You stand accused here, not honored." He slammed his gavel, the sound sharp, desperate. But the crowd did not move. They did not fear his command. They had seen too much, heard too much. Amara's voice was louder in their hearts than his gavel could ever be. Amara lifted her eyes to him, calm, steady. Her tone carried no anger. "No fear, only truth, Your Honor," she said softly. "You think respect is shown by clothes, but I will tell you what respect truly is." The room leaned forward. Every word she spoke carried weight. Respect is not in fabric, not in polished shoes, not in silk ties. Respect is in the heart. It is in the work we do when no one is watching. It is in the lives we touch when there is nothing left to give. Her voice grew stronger. "Last night, I worked until my body wanted to fall. I held hands of the sick. I whispered comfort to the dying. I carried pain that was not mine. And when the sun rose, I did not go home to sleep. I came here because this court called me." The benches stirred. Murmurs of agreement rising again. Amara continued, her eyes locked on the judge. "If this court cannot see respect in that, then perhaps it is this court that has lost its way. Not me." The judge's lips tightened. His pride wanted to strike back, but the words caught in his throat. His hand shook as he held his gavel. He was not the master of this moment anymore. Amara's last words rose, strong and clear. "I will tell you one truth, Your Honor. Respect is not demanded. It is earned. It is lived. And I have lived it, not in words, but in sacrifice. So if you see shame in my scrubs, then you are blind. But if you see the lives behind them, then you see the truth." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. The people held their breath. Some covered their mouths, tears shining in their eyes. Others nodded slowly, their faces full of pride. And then it happened. A slow clap began again. One person at the back rising to his feet, then another and another. Soon the entire courtroom was on its feet, clapping, cheering. Their voices filled the air. Not as chaos, but as honor. The judge slammed his gavel desperately. "Order. Sit down. This is my courtroom." But his words were drowned by the roar. His power had vanished, replaced by something greater. The truth. Amara did not rise with the people. She remained seated,